Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's not a stretch to say that movies these days aren't doing so well. Sure, there's the odd hit like Barbie or Dune 2, but for the most part, big budget films are underperforming. And the low to medium budget films aren't getting much of a push either. How can that be when there's more money than ever being put into this form of storytelling? And like Steve Jobs once said, the storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. Maybe that's the problem. What do I mean by that? As always, grab your popcorn. Let's get started. Let's take a step back, shall we? Picture this. It's the 1980s or 90s, and you're settling into your comfy theater seat. You've got a tub full of popcorn in your lap, a large cola in the armrest, as you eagerly await the start of the latest Hollywood blockbuster. You're sitting with friends or family in a packed theater, and there's a palpable buzz of excited energy in the air. It's as much of an event as it is a night out. You know you'll have a good time, and you'll have a story to tell the next work or school day. And chances are the movie ends up being good rather than bad. Why? Because back then, movies were all about old-fashioned storytelling. The narrative, the characters, the plot twists, the emotional journeys, the action, and the dialogue. Think of movies like Wrath of Khan or The Princess Bride or Pulp Fiction. Though completely different from one another in every way, from plot to genre to how the story unfolds, these movies had in common well-rounded, flawed characters who experienced true growth. They had utterly quotable dialogue, memorable action scenes, unpredictable plot twists and surprises, and a true love for their respective genres. And each one had some lessons to teach or wisdom to impart, even when masked with comedy or spectacle. And these were far from the only movies that I could name. These were just the first three that came to mind. What about RoboCop and Beverly Hills Cop and The Last Starfighter and Seven? The list goes on and on. And yet, as we fast forward to today, that list gets shorter and shorter. The number of memorable great films where story is king is now so small, barely a handful of movies per year are even remembered, let alone loved. Why is that? It's certainly not a lack of money. Movies now cost more than ever, and it's not a lack of star power or talent. The actors of today are as good as they've ever been. But what about story? Could it be because the emphasis in many Hollywood movies seems to have shifted from storytelling to driving particular agendas or messages? Could it be that the lessons became more important than the stories driving those lessons, rather than being a byproduct of well-told stories? Now, don't get me wrong. As a writer myself, I'm all for using our craft to highlight important issues and inspire change. But here's the thing. The story's message should never overshadow the story itself. Why, you ask? Well, think about your favorite movie or book. What made it so memorable? Was it the underlying message? Or was it the world within the pages? The characters you fell in love with and the adventures they took you on? In the best stories, the message is woven seamlessly into the narrative. It's not forced or preachy, but rather it emerges naturally from the characters' actions and experiences. Take To Kill a Mockingbird, for instance. Harper Lee didn't need to spell out her stance on racial injustice. She didn't need to bash us over the head with it. Instead, she let Scout's innocent perspective and Atticus' principles stand against prejudice speak for themselves. She trusted us enough to draw our own conclusions about who was in the right and who was in the wrong. And she knew if she told the story well enough that we would glean the very wisdom she hoped we would. Not to mention the fact that she did so in a time when racial animosity in America was at a peak. But as seminal as this work was, it never treated the audience as children and told them, "You must think this way to be a good person." It let people decide for themselves what the lessons were and why they were important. Unfortunately, it seems like many of today's Hollywood movies have forgotten this. They're more concerned with pushing an agenda than with telling a good story. For many, the lesson is the story, rather than a subtextual byproduct of the story. It's as if they've forgotten what makes movies so magical in the first place. The ability to transport us to different worlds, make us feel a wide range of emotions, and leave us thinking about it long after the credits roll. They think that spectacle trumps character development, and messaging trumps plot. Of course, I don't mean that this applies to every modern film, but when you think of Strange World or The Marvels or Rings of Power, which admittedly is not a movie but the most expensive TV series of all time, each of these had a giant budget and plenty of star power. But does a great story come to mind? Or does it bring to mind a badly taught school lesson where you're told exactly what you should think and feel? I mean, hey, you don't have to believe me. Here's a sampling of filmmakers and stars talking about their products in their own words. First, in the 80s and 90s.
These kids are all kind of like friends. They're all sort of outcasts. They need each other because the more popular kids don't want anything to do with them. And they get bored one day and they have the most extraordinary adventure that any adult could possibly imagine.
If you think about it, from a story standpoint, how is the audience going to relate to this person if they put themselves needlessly into jeopardy again?
I guess it's a breakdown and a restructuring of a man and a belief system, and also a discovery of yourself.
Finding out who he is.
Yeah.
It's not what the movie's about, running away from a robot. It is, but at the same time, there's a good story, an excellent story here, The Terminator, and it gives us a chance to play a lot of very good scenes as actors.
And so I was extremely pleased to read this script and find that, my character has a whole life and a humanity, and Ringo's and Ike's and the McClorys, they're all people. They're human beings.
And now here's a sampling of filmmakers and stars of today.
This is necessary. This is a revolutionary moment within our time, and to be the poster child of accessibility.
I like to make men uncomfortable. I enjoy making men uncomfortable.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
I was not very steeped in the comics.
I didn't read any comics or do any research.
I wasn't familiar with the comics. I wasn't familiar with the movies.
We didn't lean into a whole lot of the history of the comic books.
Yeah, candidly, we were not enormous comic fans.
I wasn't super into superhero comics when I was a kid. I read a lot of indie press stuff.
We ultimately decided to redefine it for the series and thought that it worked better for the story that we're trying to tell.
Did you ever read you haven't read the comic?
When the DVD comes out, I'm going to read a Thor comic book and just see where we went wrong.
See the difference? In the clips from the 80s and 90s, the focus was on the story and the characters, and how they learn lessons as they seek to better themselves. Now it's not about a journey to overcome inner demons or flaws in character. It's about revolution and changing paradigms and teaching the audience. It's about planting flags and being the first. Not one of these people mentions the actual plot of their films, or talks about the characters in such a way as to indicate they will undergo a change for the better. No, you get the immediate sense that it's the world that needs to change in order to accommodate these otherwise perfect characters. And by extension, it's the real world that needs to change in order to accommodate the otherwise perfect storytellers. Except they're not perfect, and neither are their stories, and neither are their characters. And the proof is in the pudding. If that pudding was made of box office receipts and streaming numbers.
Please, sir, I want some more.
What? What? Ask for more?
Now don't get me wrong. Not all modern films are bad. Many are quite excellent, but they are increasingly rare. The rest are utterly forgettable. And that's because the story increasingly takes a backseat to everything else. And it should be just the opposite. The story is the blueprint, the framework upon which everything else is built. If that's weak, then so will be the end product. And I'm not saying it's bad to have messaging or lessons in movies. Quite the opposite. Like To Kill a Mockingbird, there are valuable lessons films can teach us. But the way to do it is through a well-written story loaded with subtext, which allows the audience to be both entertained and educated. Modern activist filmmakers have forgotten about the entertained part and focus almost exclusively on the educated part. And they don't do it through subtext. They tell you overtly. And heaven help you if you don't agree. That's no way to tell a story or run a business. Audiences are not dumb, and they are increasingly demanding respect and value for their hard-earned dollars. I say it's time we give both back to them. So here's my call to Hollywood and independent filmmakers alike. Let's get back to good old-fashioned storytelling. Let's create characters that are real and relatable, plots that are engaging and surprising, and yes, messages that are meaningful and thought-provoking. But most importantly, let's remember that at the heart of every great movie is a great story. Because in the end, it's the story that will stay with us, long after the message has been forgotten. But these are just my 2 cents. Give me yours. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated with the latest content. Until next time, stay creative.